Okay, the next component that I want to talk about is going to be layer 4. Now, when it comes to layer 4, I'm not as interested in layer 4 at this particular juncture of our discussions, but I do want to make sure that we at least touch every layer of the OSI model. And like I said, after layer 4, I'm going to combine layers 5, 6, and 7 into one video set. Now, layer 4 is the transport layer. Now, when it comes to the transport layer is responsible for, again, providing some very detailed functions and capabilities. Now, among those, one of the first things that we're going to transport, left the S out, one of the main things that we're going to need to understand here is the transport layer is going to be responsible for a number of things. Among them, it's going to be the idea of host-to-host communication. And the other part that's going to really be a major offering that it's going to give us is the concept of flow control. Now, what that translates to is that I want to make certain that if I'm going to send information to another device, so again, let's draw in our hosts. And again, I'm going to have those hosts just connected directly. I mean, this isn't a typical scenario, but this is going to be a good way for us to be able to look at everything. And again, if I have host 1 and host 2, we know based on what we've already discussed that we're going to navigate the 3 layers that we've already covered, which is going to be the physical layer, the data link layer, the network layer, and then ultimately we're going to arrive up here at the transport layer. Now, the transport layer, like I said, is responsible for offering the host-to-host communication and the flow control contingencies. Now, the main goal here is that it is going to ensure message delivery. And it's going to do that through a number of functions. There's also important to understand something else that a lot of people lose track of, and that is that when we start looking at implementations, remember the layer 3, the network layer, runs under the transport layer, but together it's going to be both the transport layer and the network layer that are going to provide me the capability of being able to do some advanced functionalities that are going to extend to things like packet filtering. So the way that this happens is that in the network layer, I have IP addressing. So the thing that I can filter on when it comes to the networking component is going to be the IP addresses. In networking, I also have something called ports at the transport layer. So that's the other thing that the transport layer offers me. It gives me the capability of being able to offer multiplexing capabilities and demultiplexing capabilities. We'll go ahead and put the D in there. In such a fashion that I'm going to have the capability of being able to support simultaneous communicational flows across these links that I have illustrated between the same hosts and the same devices on the basis of what we refer to as an application port assignment. Now, what am I getting at? Well, you guys may already know, as an example, that HTTP traffic is associated to an HTTP application, and by default, it supports a port 80. Therefore, in this scenario, if I'm going to 10.1.1.1:80 for the port, then this is a particular flow that could be maintained and separate from another well-known port. So let's say port 22 or 23, let's just say SSH or Telnet. So again, it's through the deployment of these ports that I can send information to 10.1.1.1:22, or I could send information to 10.1.1.23 or :23, and this allows me to be able to utilize the addressing schemas in such a fashion that I'm sending information to these well-known ports and these well-known destinations. So this gives me the capability of being able to implement the session multiplexing that I've been describing. It also gives me the capability of being able to offer this concept of packet filtering both on the basis of source and destination IP and on source and destination ports, or just source ports, depending on whether or not I'm using an extended or a standard access list configuration. And again, it's through the assignment of these ports that I get the capability of being able to implement this configuration. Protocols that also run at this level are going to be things that we need to talk about. So one of the other elements that we need to make certain that we embrace here is the fact that this host-to-host communication may or may not need to take place in a very managed fashion. So in other words, what I'm talking about here is I may need to be able to send information between hosts in a reliable fashion. Or I may want to utilize an unreliable mechanism. Now, you would initially think that reliable would be the primary mode. So if I'm going to send information between these devices, obviously it would make sense that I would want to make certain that this device receives the information that I am actually sending. Because remember, we're encapsulating the information as we move down. We're sending the information across the link that's shared between the devices. And the main objective and the main goal here is just to ensure that these devices can continue to communicate with one another. However, if I send this device a series of pieces of information, in other words, the information that I'm going to be sending, remember we talked about protocol data units or data units at the transport layer. These are referred to as segments. So when I send segments between hosts based on these negotiated parameters that I'm going to be sending or forming between hosts, I may want to make certain that, did you receive this one? Yes. Then I'm going to send the next one. Did you send this one? Yes. Did you receive this one? Yes. And this is going to be a very reliable mechanism. And the protocol that governs this is called TCP, Transport Control Protocol. Now, Transmission Control Protocol is going to allow me to be able to ensure that this process takes place. But the problem is that there are issues with these reliable communications. We'll get into three-way handshakes and everything associated with TCP when we get into actually moving information and discussing that process. But the main thing that I want you guys to understand now is that this mechanism, although reliable, is very, very slow. Now, we also have another protocol that resides at the transport layer, layer 4, and that is referred to as UDP. User Datagram Protocol. Now, User Datagram Protocol has none of these advanced methods as far as acknowledgments and checks to ensure that this device is receiving everything in sequence, but that's okay, because another feature that the transport layer gives me is the concept of fragmentation and reassembly. So in other words, these two devices are going to negotiate with one another and determine how much information they can exchange at one time, which means that if a large amount of information needs to be exchanged, it's going to have to be broken up, i.e. fragmented. Then I'm going to send these individual composite pieces of information, these segments, across the link, and then what's going to end up happening is they're ultimately going to arrive up here at the transport layer in the receiving host, and this device is going to have to reassemble that information so that it actually recompile the original message that's being sent. It's just going to do it on a piece-by-piece basis. Now, the drawback to this is that this is, like I said, it's unreliable. So the assumption here is the host is just going to say, hey, I'm just going to operate under the assumption that the receiver got the information that I sent. Now, what this does is this makes this very, basically the opposite of slow. It's going to make this very fast. It's going to be a very fast method of communication. And since it's fast, it's going to be one of the preferred methods that we're going to use. And in fact, a lot of people are really, really surprised when they find out that voice information, a type of payload that we have inside of our infrastructure that cannot afford to be dropped, does not use reliable transport mechanism. Voice is actually going to be based on this idea of UDP, User Datagram Protocol, because it would be so much easier to just drop the packet than to force the communication between endpoints, i.e. in this instance we would be talking about ePhones or IP telephony constructs. But the point here is that it's going to be through the utilization of UDP that we're going to be able to ensure that things happen quickly. So we'd much rather lose a packet in a voice conversation than to drag down an entire conversation with these handshakes and these mechanisms that are going to be responsible with managing TCP. So it's kind of like this. I hand a session, or I hand a piece of information off to a host. The host is going to get that. Then I'm going to say, did you receive it? The host is going to say, yes, I received it. Send me another one. Then I'll send him that information. And this handshake mechanism that is making certain that this information is indeed reliable is going to slow things down in the end. So sometimes the choice as to whether or not you're going to pick a fast or slow method is going to really not make much sense, because for a lot of instances, even with sensitive information, we still choose to send things using UDP simply for the reason that UDP is fast. So sometimes these decisions are kind of counterintuitive. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to move into the next video, which is going to talk about layer 5, layer 6, and layer 7 together, because we're not really too worried about these as far as how they impact us at this particular level. Later on, obviously, we're going to have to really take a critical look at layer 4, 5, 6, and 7, especially when we start talking about software-defined networking and policy-driven constructs like those that we see in the ACI. But remember, this is an associate's level certification. Therefore, it's not something that we're going to dig massively deep into. So I'm Terry Vincent, and I'll see you guys in the upcoming video where we're going to talk about the layer 5 through layer 7 services.